The Great Hall of the Galactic Council shone with lights of every color. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of species filled the massive chamber. They wore their finest clothes and their proudest expressions. Today was a day of celebration. High Chancellor Moroth stood at the central platform. His gray skin stretched tight over his skull as he smiled at the gathered crowd. Behind him, a holographic display showed the spinning symbol of the council. 3 rings wrapped around a single star. 4,000 years ago, Moroth announced, his voice carrying through the hall. Our ancestors made a difficult choice. They cleansed a world of biological contamination. They protected the galaxy from a threat that could have destroyed us all. Today, we honor their wisdom. The crowd applauded. Delegates from the Kreth, the Vorian, the Melax, and dozens of other species clapped their hands or tentacles or whatever limbs they possessed. The sound echoed like thunder. Ambassador Vela of the Kreth did not applaud. She stood near the back of the hall, her blue scales catching the light as she watched the celebration with troubled eyes. She was young for a diplomat, barely 200 years old, but she had read things in the old archives, things that did not match the pretty words the Chancellor spoke. The official history called it the purification. The records said Earth was an uninhabited world filled with dangerous organisms. The Council had sterilized it for the safety of all species, a sad but necessary action. But Vela had found other records, older ones, records that spoke of cities and art and music, records that mentioned something called humanity. She had tried to ask her superiors about these records. They told her to forget what she had seen. They told her some questions were better left unasked. They told her that curiosity could end careers. Vela had not forgotten. The celebration continued around her. Servants carried trays of exotic foods and drinks. Musicians played songs of triumph and peace. Delegates laughed and congratulated each other on 4,000 years of galactic harmony. Then the lights flickered. At first, no one noticed. The music kept playing. The delegates kept talking. But the lights flickered again, and then every screen in the hall went dark. Chancellor Moroth stopped speaking. His smile faded as he looked around in confusion. Security officers rushed toward the platform, their weapons drawn. A single image appeared on every screen. It was a blue and green sphere, beautiful and bright against the darkness of space. Vela recognized it from the forbidden records. It was Earth. Then the image changed. The blue and green became red and orange. Fire spread across the surface like a disease. Oceans boiled away. Continents cracked and burned. In minutes, the beautiful sphere became a dead rock, gray and silent. A voice spoke through the hall's speakers. It was calm and clear, speaking perfect galactic standard. We remember. The crowd erupted in chaos. Delegates screamed and pushed toward the exits. Security officers shouted orders that no one followed. Chancellor Moroth demanded explanations that no one could give. Vela stood still in the middle of the panic. Her heart beat fast in her chest, but she did not run. She watched the image of the burning world and thought about the records she had found. The records that mentioned 8 billion lives. The chaos lasted for nearly an hour before the Council restored order. Security teams swept the building, but found no intruders. Technical experts examined the systems, but found no evidence of hacking. The message had come from nowhere. Or rather, it had come from everywhere. Reports flooded in from across Council space. Every world, every station, every ship had received the same broadcast at the same moment. The image of the burning Earth, the words we remember, nothing else. Chancellor Moroth called an emergency session of the Inner Council. The 12 most powerful species gathered in a sealed chamber deep beneath the Great Hall. Vela was not invited, but her superior, Elder Counselor Dren, brought her along to take notes. "This is clearly a hoax," declared Admiral Torvax of the Vorian military. His massive frame filled his seat as he waved a dismissive hand. "Some terrorist group trying to frighten us. We should ignore it. Ignore a simultaneous broadcast to every system in Council space," replied Minister Yenna of the Melax. Her many eyes blinked in sequence as she spoke. "That would require technology far beyond anything we possess. This is not some amateur provocation." "Then what is it?" demanded Chancellor Moroth. "The species that lived on that world is extinct. We made certain of that 4,000 years ago. Vela's stylus froze over her tablet. She had never heard anyone admit so plainly that Earth had been inhabited. She looked around the room, but no one else seemed surprised by the Chancellor's words. "Perhaps we were not as thorough as our ancestors believed," said Elder Dren quietly. "There were rumors at the time. A colony ship that escaped the blockade. It was never confirmed. Rumors and myths," scoffed Admiral Torvax. "Even if some humans survived, they would have died in the void. They had no faster-than-light capability. Their technology was primitive. Their technology was primitive for 1,000 years ago." Minister Yenna corrected. "Much can change in such time." The argument continued for hours. Vela recorded every word, her mind racing with questions. Why had the Council destroyed Earth? What threat had humanity posed? And if some humans had survived, what did they want now? The answers came 3 days later. A ship appeared at the edge of Council space. It emerged from a region of empty void where no ship had ever traveled, where no life could possibly exist. It was small, barely larger than a shuttle, and its design matched nothing in Council records. A patrol fleet moved to intercept. 12 heavy cruisers surrounded the tiny vessel, their weapons locked and ready. The ship did not flee. It did not fight. It simply hung in space, silent and still. When the patrol commander demanded identification, the ship broadcast a single message, the same words that had echoed through the Great Hall. "We remember." Then it vanished. The patrol ships recorded everything. Their sensors showed no jump signature, no warp trail, no sign of any known propulsion method. The ship simply stopped existing in one location and started existing somewhere else. Their instruments could not explain it. Their scientists could not explain it. Their admirals could not explain it. More ships appeared over the following weeks. They showed up in orbit around Council worlds, in the traffic lanes between systems, in the empty spaces where no one thought to look. They never attacked. They never communicated beyond those 2 words. They just watched, and the Council began to panic. Vela used the chaos to dig deeper into the forbidden archives. She found records that had been sealed for millennia, documents that contradicted everything she had been taught. The truth was uglier than she had imagined. Earth had not been uninhabited. 8 billion humans had lived there. They had built cities and ships and dreams. They had reached out to the stars with hope and curiosity. And when they had met the Council, they had been offered a choice: surrender or die. The Council had discovered something valuable beneath Earth's surface, a mineral that could revolutionize faster-than-light travel. They had demanded that humanity hand over their world and accept permanent servitude. The humans had refused, so the Council had burned them. Vela sat alone in the archive, surrounded by the ghosts of 8 billion murdered souls. She understood now why the elders had told her not to ask questions. The Galactic Council was not built on wisdom and cooperation. It was built on genocide. She thought about the strange ships watching from the darkness. She thought about the message they carried, and she realized that for 1,000 years was a very long time to wait for justice. The next morning, Vela requested a meeting with Elder Dren. She showed him what she had found. She expected him to be shocked. Instead, he looked tired. "I know," he said quietly. "I have always known. My ancestor was on the Council when the vote was taken. He voted yes. How can you live with that?" Vela asked. "By telling myself it was necessary. By believing the lies we tell our children. By pretending that the past does not matter." He sighed and looked at the records on Vela's tablet. "But the past always matters. And now it has come back to remind us." That evening, the largest fleet in galactic history gathered at the edge of Council space. 3,000 warships from every member species formed a wall of metal and fire. They waited for the enemy that lurked in the void beyond. They did not wait long. A light appeared in the darkness, then another, then 1,000 more. Ships emerged from nowhere, filling the empty space like stars being born. They were massive, each one larger than anything the Council had ever built. Their hulls were black and smooth, and they carried no visible weapons. But their numbers were beyond counting. The Council fleet held position, waiting for orders. The enemy fleet hung motionless, waiting for something else. Then a single ship moved forward from the human line. It was smaller than the others, almost delicate in its design. It broadcast a message to the Council fleet, to the watching worlds, to every corner of the galaxy. 4,000 years ago, you burned our world. 4,000 years ago, you murdered 8 billion of our people. 4,000 years ago, you thought you had erased us from existence. You were wrong. We survived, we grew, we remembered, and now we have returned. Not for war, not yet. We have returned to Aska. 4,000 years earlier, a ship called the Exodus drifted through the empty space between stars. It was not a warship or an exploration vessel. It was a colony ship, built to carry 3,000 humans to a new home on a distant world. It had left Earth 6 months before the Council fleet arrived. Captain Maya Chen stood on the observation deck and watched her homeworld die. The distance was too great to see details. Earth was just a bright dot among millions of other dots. But the ship's sensors told the truth. They showed the Council weapons firing. They showed the oceans boiling away. They showed the atmosphere burning off into space. They showed 8 billion life signs becoming zero. Maya was 32 years old. She had a husband on Earth, parents, friends, a whole life that was now ash and memory. Around her, other crew members watched in silence. Some wept, some screamed, some simply stared at the screens with empty eyes. None of them could look away. "Captain," said her first officer, his voice hollow, "what do we do?" Maya did not answer. What answer could she give? Their world was gone. Their species was nearly extinct. They were 3,000 souls in a metal box, drifting through infinite darkness with nowhere to go. The Council would hunt them. She knew this. They would not allow witnesses to survive. Every ship, every station, every human anywhere would be tracked down and destroyed. The Council wanted humanity erased completely. Maya looked at the dot that had been Earth. She felt something cold and hard forming in her chest. It was not grief. Grief would come later. This was something else. Something that would take 4,000 years to fully bloom. "Set course for the void," she said quietly. "Take us where no one will follow. Take us where no one will find us. The void." Her first officer asked, "There's nothing there. No stars, no planets, no resources. We'll die, maybe," Maya agreed. "But if we die in the void, we die free. And if we live," she paused, watching the last light fade from her home world. "If we live, we will remember. And one day, we will return." The Exodus turned away from the galaxy that had murdered its creators. It flew into the darkness between galaxies, into the emptiness that no species had ever explored. It flew toward nothing, carrying everything that remained of humanity. The journey nearly killed them. The void was empty in ways that the human mind could barely understand. No stars meant no light, no heat, no radiation to harvest for power. The ship's reactors worked constantly just to keep the passengers alive. Food ran short. Water had to be recycled again and again. People died from illness, from accidents, from simple despair. But they did not give up. Maya Chen became more than a captain in those early years. She became a symbol. She walked through the ship every day, talking to passengers, encouraging the tired, comforting the grieving. She told them stories about Earth. She made them promise to tell those stories to their children. She turned memory into sacred duty. "They want us to disappear," she said in her speeches. "They want us to fade into nothing, forgotten and unmourned. We will not give them that satisfaction. We will survive. We will grow. We will remember every name of every soul they murdered. And we will carry those names back to them." The first generation born on the Exodus grew up hearing these words. They grew up with the names of the dead. They grew up knowing that somewhere behind them, across the impossible distance, lay the ashes of a world they would never see. They grew up angry, but Maya taught them to control that anger. She taught them that revenge without power was just suicide. She taught them to be patient, to plan, to build. She taught them that for 1,000 years was not too long to wait for justice. She did not live to see that justice. No human of her generation did. But they laid the foundations. They discovered new sciences in the void, learned secrets that the crowded galaxy had never found. They built new ships from materials they invented. They extended their lives through technologies they created. They grew strong in the darkness, unseen and unsuspected. Generations passed. The Exodus became a fleet. The fleet became a civilization. Cities floated in the void, powered by stars they carried with them. Billions of humans lived and worked, and dreamed in the space between galaxies. And they never forgot. Every child learned the names. Every adult carried the weight. The memorial, they called it. A perfect holographic recreation of Earth built from every scrap of data the Exodus had saved. You could walk through cities that no longer existed. You could see faces of people who had been dead for millennia. You could stand on beaches that had boiled away and look up at skies that had burned. The memorial was sacred ground. No human could visit without weeping. But not all humans agreed on what to do with their grief. Some wanted immediate revenge. They built weapons that could crack planets, technologies that made council fleets look like toys. They wanted to sweep back into the galaxy and burn everything the way Earth had been burned. Others wanted to forget. They argued that humanity should build a new life in the void, leave the galaxy behind forever. Why risk everything for revenge against species that would be long dead before they arrived? Let the past stay in the past. The debate raged for centuries. Wars nearly broke out between the factions. The fragile unity that Maya Chen had built threatened to shatter into chaos. Then a woman named Kira Chen stood up to speak. She was Maya's direct descendant, born 3,000 years after the Exodus fled Earth. She had spent her long life studying history, reading every record, watching every recording of Maya's speeches. She understood what her ancestor had really wanted. Revenge is not enough, Kira told the gathered leaders. Our ancestors did not survive the void just so we could become murderers. They survived so that we could be witnesses, so that we could carry the truth back to a galaxy that has forgotten, so that we could make them see what they did. And then what? Demanded the leader of the revenge faction. We show them the truth and they apologize? We shake hands and forget 8 billion dead? No, Kira replied. We show them the truth and we watch them live with it. We make them remember for the rest of their existence. We make sure that what they did to us defines them forever. Death is easy. Memory is eternal. The debate continued for another century. But slowly, Kira's faction gained support. The humans of the void chose witness over destruction. They chose to be the galaxy's conscience rather than its executioner. They began to prepare. Back in the present, Ambassador Vela stood before the inner council with a report that no one wanted to hear. Our analysis is complete, she announced. The human fleet contains approximately 50,000 vessels. Each one is larger and more advanced than anything we possess. Their weapons systems are beyond our understanding. Their defensive capabilities are beyond our measurement. If they choose to attack, we cannot stop them. Admiral Torvax slammed his fist on the table. Impossible. We have 3,000 ships. We have the combined military might of 100 species. You're telling me that a handful of survivors from a primitive world have surpassed all of us? They had for 1,000 years, Vela replied. For 1,000 years with nothing to do but hate us and prepare. For 1,000 years of uninterrupted development. Yes, Admiral. They have surpassed us. Chancellor Moroth looked pale. Then we must negotiate. Offer them whatever they want. Territory, resources, reparations. I don't think they want any of those things, Vela said quietly. They asked us a question. They asked us why. Why what? Why we destroyed their world. Why we murdered their species. Why we erased them from history and celebrated their death for 1,000 years. Vela looked around the table at the most powerful beings in the galaxy. I've read the records, Chancellor. I know what our ancestors did. Can any of you give them an answer? The silence stretched for a long moment. No one spoke. No one could. Finally, Elder Dren cleared his throat. Someone must go to them. Someone must try to explain. Or at least, someone must try to understand what they truly want. That sounds like suicide. Admiral Torvax growled. Perhaps, Dren agreed. But it may be our only chance. He looked at Vela with something like respect. You found the truth when others wanted it buried. You asked questions when you were told to be silent. I think you should be our ambassador to the humans. Vela felt her heart skip. Me, I'm the youngest member of the diplomatic corps. I have no experience with anything like this. None of us have experience with anything like this. Chancellor Moroth said grimly. But Dren is right. You know what we did. You haven't spent your life building lies to hide it. Perhaps that makes you the only one who can speak to them honestly. Vela looked around the room at the frightened faces of the council leaders. She thought about the burning world and the 8 billion names. She thought about the ships waiting in the darkness. "I'll go," she said, "but I won't lie to them. Whatever they ask, I'll tell the truth. The truth may doom us all," Admiral Torvax warned. "The lies already have," Vela replied. That night, she boarded a small diplomatic shuttle and flew toward the human fleet. Behind her, the council watched and waited and prayed to gods they barely remembered. Ahead of her, 50,000 ships hung in the void like judgment waiting to fall. And somewhere among those ships, Kira Chen watched the approaching shuttle with eyes that had seen for 1,000 years of grief. She had waited her entire impossibly long life for this moment. She had Karidvila's shuttle approach the human flagship, and felt smaller with every passing moment. The ship before her was enormous, a dark mountain floating in space. Its hull stretched for kilometers in every direction, smooth and black and silent. No weapons were visible, but Vela could feel power radiating from it like heat from a star. Her communication system crackled to life. "Council vessel, you are cleared to dock at Bay 7. Follow the guide lights. Do not deviate from the marked path." The voice was human, speaking Galactic standard with a slight accent that Vela had never heard before. She followed the lights as instructed, guiding her small shuttle into the massive ship's interior. The docking bay alone was larger than most Council space stations. Hundreds of other vessels rested in neat rows, ships of every size and configuration. Humans moved among them, working and talking and living their lives. Vela realized with a shock that this was not just a warship. It was a city. A greeting party waited for her at the landing pad. They were human, dressed in simple gray uniforms without decoration or rank insignia. Their faces were calm and curious as they watched her exit the shuttle. "Ambassador Vela," said the lead human, a tall woman with dark skin and silver hair. "Welcome aboard the Earth's Memory. I am Commander Sasha, and I will take you to meet Admiral Chen." Vela stepped onto the deck and looked around at the impossible scale of the place. "This ship, I've never seen anything like it." "No," Commander Sasha agreed. "You wouldn't have. Please follow me." They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Vela saw gardens filled with plants she didn't recognize. She saw libraries stacked with actual paper books. She saw schools where children learned and laughed. She saw cafeterias and workshops and theaters. She saw life. "How many people live on this ship?" she asked. "Earth's Memory carries approximately 2 million permanent residents," Commander Sasha replied. "It's one of our smaller city ships." Vela's mind struggled to comprehend. 2 million people on one vessel. And this was a small one. The reports had identified 50,000 ships in the human fleet. How many humans were there? How many had they become in for 1,000 years? They reached a large door at the end of a long corridor. Commander Sasha stopped and turned to face Vela. "The Admiral is waiting for you inside. I should warn you, Ambassador. She is very old. She remembers things that the rest of us only know from records. She has carried a heavy burden for a very long time. Please treat her with respect." "I understand," Vela said, though she wasn't sure she did. The door opened, and Vela stepped into a room unlike anything she had expected. It was a garden. Trees grew from actual soil. Flowers bloomed in every color. A small stream ran through the center, feeding into a pond where fish swam in lazy circles. Birds sang in the branches. The air smelled of growth and life. At the center of the garden, an old woman sat on a simple bench. Her hair was white, her face lined with centuries of age. But her eyes were young and sharp, filled with an intensity that made Vela want to look away. "Ambassador Vela of the Kreth," the old woman said. Her voice was soft but carried clearly through the garden. "I am Kira Chen. Please, sit with me." Vela approached the bench and sat down carefully. Up close, she could see the weight of years on Admiral Chen's face. Not just decades or centuries, but millennia. This woman had been alive when Earth burned. "You're wondering how old I am," Kira said with a slight smile. "For 1,043 years. I was born on the Exodus, 12 years after it fled your galaxy. My mother held me up to the observation window and told me that the light I saw came from our dead world. I have never forgotten that moment. I don't know what to say," Vela admitted. "I'm sorry seems completely inadequate." "It is," Kira agreed. "But I appreciate that you understand that." Your leaders sent you because you're young and honest. They hope that your innocence will somehow protect them from judgment. They're wrong, but it was a clever choice nonetheless. I came because I want to understand. Vela said. I read the old records. I know what the council did, but I don't understand why. And I don't understand what you want now. Kira studied her for a long moment. Then she stood and offered her hand. Come with me. I want to show you something. They walked through the garden to a hidden door. Behind it was a transport pod that carried them deep into the ship's interior. When they emerged, Vela found herself standing at the edge of an impossible space. It was Earth, not a recording or a simple hologram. It was a perfect recreation of the planet's surface, stretching for kilometers in every direction. Vela could see cities and forests and mountains and oceans. She could see people walking through the streets, could hear the sounds of traffic and conversation and life. This is the memorial, Kira said quietly. Every scrap of data the Exodus saved. Every image, every recording, every piece of art and music and literature. We put it all together and built this place. You can walk through cities that no longer exist. You can see faces of people who have been dead for 4,000 years. You can experience everything that was lost. Vela walked forward in a daze. She stood on a street corner in a city called New York. Humans moved around her, going about their daily lives, completely unaware that they were ghosts. She could hear them laughing and arguing and singing. She could smell food cooking from nearby restaurants. It was so real, so alive. 8 billion, 437,212,903, Kira said. That is the exact number of humans who died when the council burned our world. We know every name. We have records of every life, not just numbers on a page, but real people with hopes and fears and dreams. She led Vela to a massive wall that rose higher than any building. Names were carved into its surface, stretching up and up until they disappeared into the artificial sky. Millions upon millions of names. This wall contains the name of every person who died. Kira continued. It takes 7 days to walk from one end to the other. 7 days just to read the names, and every name represents a life that was stolen, a future that was erased, a story that will never be told. Vela felt tears running down her face. She had read the numbers in the old records, but numbers were abstract. This was real. This was the weight of genocide, carved in stone and preserved for eternity. Why? She whispered. Why did we do this? Kira turned to face her. Your ancestors discovered a mineral beneath Earth's surface. They called it element 115 in our language. It was unique in the known universe. It could have revolutionized faster than light travel, made the Council the most powerful force in existence. They demanded that humanity hand over our world and accept permanent servitude as payment for being allowed to live. And when we refused, they decided that we were a threat, not because we could fight them. We couldn't. Our technology was primitive compared to theirs. We were a threat because we said no, because we chose death over slavery, because we proved that not every species could be conquered. Kira's voice grew hard. They didn't just want the mineral. They wanted obedience. We denied them that, so they made an example of us. They burned our world and erased us from history so that no other species would ever think to resist. Vela sat down heavily on a nearby bench. Everything she had been taught about the Council, about galactic civilization, about her own species' noble history, it was all lies, built on the graves of 8 billion murdered people. I don't know how to make this right, she said honestly. I don't think anyone can. You're correct, Kira replied. Nothing can bring back the dead. Nothing can undo 4,000 years of pain. But you can do something that might matter almost as much. What? Kira sat down beside her. You can tell the truth. You can make sure that what happened to us is never forgotten. You can tear down the lies and make the galaxy see what the Council really is. They'll never agree to that. The Council is built on this lie. Admitting the truth would destroy everything they've built. Yes, it would. Kira smiled. But there was no joy in it. And that is our justice. Not death. Not destruction. Truth. We could burn every Council world to ash. We have the power. We have the technology. We could wipe out every species that voted for our extinction. But that would make us like them. That would prove they were right to fear us. Instead, we choose to let them live with what they did. We choose to make them remember, forever, that their civilization began with genocide. Vela thought about the celebration she had attended, the anniversary of the purification. She thought about the proud speeches and the lying smiles. She thought about what it would mean to replace those lies with truth. It will tear the council apart, she said. Younger species will demand answers. Old alliances will crumble. There could be civil war. Perhaps, Kira acknowledged. Or perhaps it will make you better. Perhaps facing the truth will force you to become the civilization you always claimed to be. That is our hope. That is why we chose this path instead of revenge. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small crystal. This contains everything. Every record of what happened. Every na. Vela returned to council space, carrying the weight of 8 billion souls in her pocket. The small crystal felt heavier than any burden she had ever known. It contained truth, and truth, she was discovering, was the heaviest thing in the universe. The inner council was waiting for her when she arrived. Chancellor Moroth, Admiral Torvax, Elder Dren, and all the others sat around their polished table, their faces tight with fear and hope. They wanted to believe that Vela had negotiated some kind of deal. They wanted to believe that the nightmare could be made to go away. Vela shattered that hope with her first words. They don't want territory. They don't want resources. They don't want reparations. She placed the crystal on the table. They want us to remember. The silence that followed was absolute. 12 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy stared at the tiny crystal, as if it were a bomb about to explode. Remember what? Chancellor Moroth finally asked. Everything. Vela activated the crystal, and holographic images filled the room. Earth before the attack, blue and green and beautiful. The council fleet arriving, weapons charged. The fire that consumed everything. The 8 billion faces of the dead, scrolling past too fast to see, but too slow to ignore. This is what our ancestors did, Vela continued. They demanded humanity's surrender. When humans refused, they burned their world and erased them from history. They told us it was a purification of biological contamination. They lied. They murdered 8 billion people because those people had the courage to say no. Admiral Torvax stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is propaganda. The humans created this to manipulate us, to weaken our resolve before they attack. It's not propaganda, Elder Dren said quietly. His voice was tired. I've seen the original records. My ancestor voted for the destruction. What she shows us is truth. You knew. Minister Yena's many eyes widened in shock. You knew and said nothing for all these years? We all knew, Dren replied. The founding species all knew. We agreed to bury it, to protect the council, to preserve galactic stability. We told ourselves it was necessary. We told ourselves that the past didn't matter. He looked at the images of the burning world. We were wrong. The room erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted accusations at each other. Some demanded to know who else had known. Others insisted that the information must be suppressed, hidden away again before it could spread further. A few simply sat in stunned silence, watching their understanding of history crumble around them. Chancellor Moroth raised his hands for silence. Enough. Fighting among ourselves solves nothing. We must decide what to do. What is there to decide? Admiral Torvax growled. We suppress this information and prepare for war. The humans are clearly trying to divide us before they attack. They could have attacked without warning, Vela pointed out. Their technology is so far beyond ours that we couldn't stop them if they tried. They chose to talk instead. They chose to give us a chance to do what? To acknowledge what we did. To remember the dead. To teach the truth instead of lies. Vela looked around the table. They want us to declare a day of galactic mourning. They want every species to learn what happened to Earth. They want the truth to become part of our history forever. Impossible, Moroth said flatly. Such an admission would destroy the Council. Species would lose faith in our institutions. Alliances would crumble. There would be chaos. There will be chaos either way, Vela replied. The humans are already broadcasting the truth to every world in Council space. The information is spreading whether we like it or not. Our only choice is whether we admit the truth willingly or have it forced upon us. The debate continued for hours. Some leaders argued for total suppression, using every resource to block the human broadcasts. Others advocated for immediate surrender, giving the humans whatever they wanted to avoid destruction. A few suggested a preemptive strike, a desperate attempt to destroy the human fleet before it was too late. Elder Dren listened to all of it with growing sadness. Finally, he stood and spoke. 4,000 years ago, my ancestor made a choice. She chose to murder billions of innocent people rather than face a universe where not every species bowed to council authority. She chose genocide over acceptance. She chose fear over honor. His voice grew stronger. I will not make the same choice. I say we tell the truth. I say we accept responsibility for what we did. I say we become the civilization we always pretended to be. That's easy for you to say. Admiral Torvax sneered. Your species wasn't even military. You didn't give the order to fire. No, Dren agreed. We just voted yes when they asked for permission. We are all guilty. Every founding species, every generation that kept the secret, every leader who celebrated the anniversary of mass murder. He looked at Vela. Perhaps it's time for a younger generation to lead us, one that doesn't carry our shame. Vela felt the weight of every eye in the room. I'm not qualified to lead the council. None of us are, Dren replied. But you're the only one willing to tell the truth. That makes you more qualified than any of us. The vote was called that night. It was close, closer than Vela had expected. The old guard fought hard to maintain the lies that had protected them for millennia. But the younger representatives, those who had learned the truth and been horrified by it, voted for change. By a margin of 7-5, the Galactic Council agreed to acknowledge its genocide of humanity. The announcement was broadcast to every world in council space the next morning. Chancellor Moroth read the words himself, his voice steady despite the shame visible on his face. 4,000 years ago, the founding members of this council committed an act of unspeakable evil. They destroyed a world called Earth and murdered 8 billion innocent beings. They did this not out of necessity, but out of greed and fear. They lied about their actions and taught those lies to their children and their children's children. Today, we end those lies. Today, we acknowledge the truth. Today, we begin to remember. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On 100 worlds, citizens gathered in the streets, some to protest, some to mourn, some simply to try and understand. Governments issued statements of shock and condemnation. Alliances that had stood for millennia began to fracture, as species questioned everything they had been taught about their shared history. It was chaos, exactly as Moroth had predicted. But it was also something else. It was truth. Vela returned to the human fleet to deliver the council's response. She found Admiral Kira Chen standing before a massive window, looking out at the stars. I watched your announcement, Kira said without turning around. It was a good speech. I almost believed that Moroth was sorry. Some of them are, Vela replied. Others are just afraid. But they did what you asked. They told the truth. Yes, they did. Kira turned to face her. Do you know how long I've waited for this moment? 4,000 years of carrying the dead with me. 4,000 years of planning and hoping and fearing that when the time came, we would choose revenge instead of truth. She smiled, but her eyes were wet. When you live as long as I have, you learn that victory rarely looks the way you imagined it would. Is this victory? Vela asked. The council is falling apart. Species are at each other's throats. Everything is uncertain. Everything was always uncertain. The council just hid it behind pretty lies. Kira walked to a nearby seat and sat down heavily. She looked old in that moment, older than her already impossible years. I'm tired, Ambassador. I've carried this burden for so long. I've kept myself alive through technologies that should not exist, all because I needed to see this day. And now that it's here, I don't know what to do with myself. Vela sat across from her. What happens now? Will your people integrate with the galaxy? Will you join the council? That will be for the next generation to decide. I've led my people to this moment. What comes next should be their choice, not mine. Kira looked at Vela with something like affection. You've done well, young one. You faced truths that would have broken most beings. You stood for honesty when everyone around you demanded lies. You give me hope that this galaxy can become something better than what it was. I don't feel hopeful, Vela admitted. I feel scared. Everything I believed about my civilization was wrong. I don't know who we are anymore. That's the beginning of wisdom, Kira said. The first step toward becoming better is admitting that you were worse than you thought. She reached out and took Vela's hand. I won't lie to you. The road ahead will be hard. There will be those who resist the truth, who fight to restore the old lies. There will be violence and betrayal and suffering. But there will also be growth, change, maybe even redemption. Do you believe in redemption? Vela asked. After everything that was done to your people. Kira was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I have too. If I don't believe that people can change, then what was the point of all this? What was the point of choosing truth over revenge? She squeezed Vela's hand. My ancestors could have burned your galaxy to ash. They chose not to. They chose to give you a chance to be better. I have to believe that chance means something. Vela thought about the burning world and the wall of names. She thought about the children learning lies and the leaders covering up murders. She thought about all the ways that Konir had passed since the truth shook the galaxy. Across council space, every world observed the first Galactic Remembrance Day. Screens in every city, on every station, on every ship displayed the same thing, the names of the 8 billion humans who had died on Earth. The names scrolled continuously, too fast to read but too slow to ignore. It would take the entire day to show them all. On the Kreth homeworld, Ambassador Vela stood in the central plaza of the capital city. Thousands of her people surrounded her, watching the names scroll past in silence. Some wept, some bowed their heads in shame. Some simply stared, trying to understand how their civilization had built itself on such a terrible lie. Vela had spent the past year traveling from world to world, telling the truth about Earth. She had spoken to crowds of millions and to small gatherings of skeptics. She had answered questions that had no good answers. She had faced anger and denial and grief in equal measure. And slowly, painfully, the galaxy had begun to change. The old council was gone, dissolved in the chaos that followed the revelation. In its place, a new government was forming, one that included representatives from every species, including humanity. The founding species had lost their special status. Their ancestors' crimes had stripped them of the authority they had held for millennia. Some had accepted this with grace. Others had fought against it, desperate to maintain the power they had inherited from murderers. There had been violence. There had been betrayals. There had been dark days when Vela wondered if the galaxy would tear itself apart. But it hadn't, not yet. And every day that passed without destruction was a small victory. The names continued to scroll across the screens. 8,437,212,903. Each name a life. Each life a story that would never be told. Vela thought about Admiral Kira Chen, who had watched Earth burn as an infant and carried that memory for 4,000 years. She thought about the humans of the void, who had transformed their grief into patience and their rage into witness. She thought about the choice they had made, to seek truth instead of revenge. That choice had saved the galaxy from destruction. Now it fell to others to prove it had been worth making. Far from council space, at the edge of the great void, the human fleet remained at anchor. 50,000 ships still hung in the darkness, watching and waiting. But their purpose had changed. They were no longer a weapon aimed at the heart of galactic civilization. They were a reminder, a memorial, a promise that the truth would never be forgotten again. Admiral Kira Chen walked through the gardens of the Earth's memory, alone with her thoughts. The ship was quieter than it had been for years. Most of the population had moved to the new human settlements being established in council space. The great city ships were becoming monuments, preserved for future generations to visit and remember. Kira was tired. For the first time in 4,000 years, she felt ready to rest. A young girl ran past her, chasing a ball through the flower beds. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes. She was followed by 2 other children, a Kreth with shimmering blue scales and a Melax with a dozen waving eye stalks. Kira stopped and watched them play. Human and alien children, running and laughing together. A year ago, such a sight would have been impossible. Now it was becoming common. The human girl noticed Kira watching and ran over, her ball forgotten. "Are you the admiral?" the girl asked. "The one who's older than everyone." Kira smiled. "That's me. My teacher said you remember Earth, the real Earth, before it was burned." "I don't remember it myself," Kira replied. "I was born after, but my mother remembered. She told me stories, and I've kept those stories safe ever since." The girl thought about this seriously. "That's a long time to remember stories." "It is," Kira agreed. "But some stories are too important to forget." The Kreth child approached cautiously. "My parents says your people could have destroyed us. They say you had the power to burn all our worlds like we burned yours." Kira knelt down so she was at eye level with the children. "That's true. We could have. We had the technology and the numbers. We had every right to seek revenge for what was done to our ancestors. Why didn't you?" the Melax child asked, their eye stalks quivering with curiosity. Kira considered the question carefully. How did you explain 4,000 years of philosophy and debate to a child? How did you convey the weight of a decision that had spanned generations? "Because revenge wouldn't have brought our people back," she said finally. "It would just have created more dead people for someone else to mourn. We didn't want the galaxy to have more names to remember. We wanted it to remember the names that already existed." "That's sad," the human girl said. "Yes," Kira agreed. "It is. But it's also hopeful. Because now you three can play together. Your species can learn from each other and build things together. That wouldn't have been possible if we had chosen destruction." The children looked at each other. Then back at Kira. "My teacher says you're going to die soon," the human girl said with the bluntness of the young. "Because you're too old. Your teacher is probably right. I've lived a very long time. Longer than anyone should. But that's okay. I got to see what I needed to see." "What did you need to see?" Kira looked at the three children, standing together in the garden of a ship named for a dead world. She thought about all the years of waiting and planning. She thought about her mother, pressing her against the window to see the light of their burning homeworld. She thought about the choice she had made and the future she had fought to create. "This," she said softly. "I needed to see this." That evening, the humans held a vote. They had been holding votes for months, debating the question of whether to integrate with galactic civilization or remain apart in the void. The arguments had been fierce on both sides. Some wanted to return and claim their place among the stars. Others wanted nothing to do with the species that had tried to erase them. Kira cast her vote and then sat back to watch the results come in. She was too tired to feel nervous anymore. Whatever happened, she had done her part. The final count was close, closer than anyone had expected. But in the end, the vote was clear. Humanity would return, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as neighbors. They would build new worlds and share their technology. They would join the new council as equals. They would move forward into a future that their ancestors had died believing impossible. Kira received the news with a quiet nod. She thought about her mother, about Maya Chen who had guided the exodus into the void, about all the generations who had kept the faith through the long darkness. They had dreamed of this moment. They had sacrificed everything to make it possible. Now it was time for a new generation to take over. The next morning, Kira returned to the memorial. She walked through the holographic streets of New York, past buildings that no longer existed, under a sky that had burned away millennia ago. She listened to the sounds of a city that lived only in memory. Finally, she came to the wall of names. 8,437,212,903. She had walked the length of this wall more times than she could count. She had traced the names with her fingers and whispered prayers for souls she had never known. Today, she added her own name, not carved into the stone, just a whisper, carried away by the artificial wind, a promise that she would see them soon. Kira Chen, 4,044 years old, last survivor of the generation that had fled Earth, closed her eyes and finally allowed herself to rest. Far across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, the names of the dead continued to scroll across screens. 8 billion stories that had been stolen, 8 billion lives that had been erased, 8 billion reasons to remember. And beside those screens, throughout the galaxy, children of every species stood together, human and Kreth and Melax and dozens of others. They watched the names pass by, and they learned. They learned what their ancestors had done, and they learned why it mattered. They learned that truth was stronger than lies, that memory was more powerful than revenge, that the choices they made would echo through millennia. They learned that the past could not be changed, but the future was still being written. And somewhere in the void between galaxies, a ship named Earth's memory drifted in the darkness, carrying the ghosts of 8 billion souls toward a future they had died to create. A future where their names would never be forgotten. A future where their children's children would stand among the stars and remember. A future that had cost everything and was worth everything. A future that began with 3 simple words: we remember.